Welcome. Tonight I'll be telling you a story called They're Watching from Above. It's a story about solitude, about what we hear when everything else is silent, and about the things that may be closer to us than we ever realize. Imagine this. You live in a small ground-floor apartment of an old building. The walls are cracked, the floors bow with age, and every night the place breathes in creaks and sighs. But there's something unusual about your upstairs neighbours. You never see them. You never hear them come or go. The only proof they exist at all are the faint footsteps above you at odd hours of the night, and the subtle, almost deliberate weight of movement in the ceiling. And then slowly, things begin to change. A shadow crosses your ceiling, though the blinds are shut tight. A whisper drifts down through the plaster and stops the instant you listen. Objects shift in your flat ever so slightly, as if touched when you're asleep. Soon, it no longer feels like you're living beneath ordinary neighbours. It feels like you're being studied, watched, observed with an intensity that no stranger ever should. This is a story about the fear that presses down from above, a story about silence and shadows and the moment when you can no longer tell who is watching who. So find a comfortable place, let your body grow heavy, and as the room around you quiets, let me take you into the old apartment building, where someone is waiting just beyond the ceiling. This is They're Watching from Above. The old apartment building breathed in drafts and groans, like a body trying to keep itself alive. I had moved in almost 2 years ago, though it always felt to me less like I had chosen the place and more like it had chosen me. The rent was cheap, the street quiet enough, and the ground floor flat offered a certain convenience I hadn't found anywhere else. But with that convenience came the drawbacks I'd grown used to. A chill that never lifted from the walls, the faint smell of old plaster and damp wood, and the peculiar way sound carried through the structure. At night, the ceiling was alive. It wasn't loud, not in the way you'd expect of an old house with squeaking pipes or radiators clanging. No, this was subtle. I would be sitting in my armchair, book propped against my chest, and hear the faint scuff of movement above me, just once, then silence. Hours later, a deliberate creak, as though weight had shifted directly overhead. I lived alone. Solitude didn't bother me. In fact, I preferred it. The flat itself had a narrow hallway that opened into a living room with one window facing the street. Behind that was the kitchen, and down another narrow stretch, the bedroom. My space was manageable, easy to keep clean, and it gave me the freedom of quiet evenings where no one bothered me. Except for them. Whoever lived above me had perfected the art of being unseen. In 2 years I had not once crossed paths with them in the stairwell, not once heard the upstairs door slam or open, though I knew they must have entered and exited. I hadn't seen their windows open, hadn't caught them carrying groceries or laundry. If not for the occasional sound above, I might have thought the flat was empty. It was the rhythm that unsettled me most. A normal neighbour's life has a shape to it. Footsteps in the morning, clatter in the evening, silence at night. But here, it was all backwards. Some nights, at 3 or 4 in the morning, I'd wake to faint pacing, as though someone was circling their room slowly, deliberately. Then, nothing for days. Other times, in the middle of the afternoon, a single heavy thump reverberated down through my ceiling, making the light fixture tremble ever so slightly. The first winter I lived there, I convinced myself it was just the building settling. Old wood expands and contracts with cold and heat. But wood doesn't mimic footsteps. It doesn't know how to pause at the same spot every time, right above where my bed sat, as though whoever was walking wanted me to know they were there. I never mentioned it to the landlord. He was the kind of man who would have shrugged it off, maybe laughed. And truthfully, I didn't want to seem paranoid. People upstairs live their lives. People downstairs put up with the noise. That's the deal. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that their silence during the day and the strangeness of their hours was not normal. The first time it truly got under my skin, I was lying in bed reading. A storm was moving in, the kind that presses down heavy against the roof and makes the air taste metallic. I had been half asleep when it happened. A slow creak, starting near the corner of the ceiling, moving across, stopping directly above me. I froze. The book slipped onto my chest. and I just lay there, staring at the plaster above. I could picture the floorboards warped and stained with years of use. The ceiling itself sagged slightly, so I knew exactly where the weight rested when the noise stopped, directly above my head. There was no follow-up sound, no pacing away, no click of a door, just the lingering impression that someone had chosen that moment to pause, to stand and to listen. I couldn't sleep after that. Every creak of the wind against the glass sounded like movement above. Every shifting shadow in the dark corners of the room seemed to stretch longer than it should. Eventually, I slipped into uneasy sleep, but from then on, I could never quite trust the ceiling. The strange part was, it didn't escalate in the way you might expect. I wasn't bombarded with constant noise. In fact, most nights were quiet. That was worse. It meant that when the sounds did come, a soft scuff of weight, a hollow vibration through the plaster, they carried an intentionality. I was forced to hear them against a backdrop of silence, each sound sharp as a pinprick. I began to time them. Sitting at my desk, I would mark down in a notebook when I heard the noises. Sometimes they followed no pattern, but once in a while there was a strange alignment, always at night between 1 and 4 in the morning, always with gaps long enough to unsettle but not forget. There was a week where nothing happened at all. I almost convinced myself I had imagined the whole thing. But on the 8th night, as I sat with the lamp burning low, the creak returned. Not footsteps this time, but the sound of something dragging lightly across the floor. It stopped directly above the chair where I sat. I remember tilting my head back, staring at the ceiling as though I might see through the plaster. My heart thudded, but I told myself it was nothing. Just the building, just wood, just air. Yet as the silence closed in again, I felt something I couldn't explain. The certainty that the noise hadn't been random. That someone upstairs knew exactly where I sat, what I was doing, and had moved in tandem. That was the moment when my relationship with the flat changed. I no longer thought of it as mine alone. I began to notice the weight of their presence at all hours, even when silent. It was in the way the ceiling seemed lower, the air heavier. It was in the strange stillness of the stairwell, how it smelled faintly of dust and mildew, but never of cooking or perfume or life. By spring, I had developed small rituals to reassure myself. Before bed, I would check the locks twice, make sure the blinds were tightly shut. I began sleeping with a lamp on, though I hated the waste of electricity. The glow made me feel less vulnerable, though it cast shadows that shifted and deepened as the night went on. And always, the ceiling waited. It happened again, one night in April, when the city was quiet beneath a blanket of rain. I was in bed, lamp glowing dim, trying to lose myself in a book, when the footsteps began. Slow, deliberate, from one end of the ceiling to the other, each board groaning faintly under weight. Then a pause. Then once more the steps reversed, pacing back across, stopping directly above me. I held my breath. The silence after was suffocating. My skin prickled with awareness, a certainty that the person above wasn't just moving, they were listening. And in that silence, lying rigid on my bed, I realized with dawning unease that I had never once heard their voices. Not a laugh, not a cough, not the murmur of a television through thin walls. Just footsteps. The days seemed to shrink around me, though I couldn't say why. Work was the same, my routines unchanged, but when I came home each evening, the flat felt different, as though its walls had shifted a fraction while I was gone. My books, neatly stacked, seemed slightly off-kilter. The kitchen chairs were not quite where I remembered leaving them. The blinds, which I always kept pulled tight, felt as though they had been touched. At first, I thought it was me, fatigue, maybe forgetfulness, but the changes became too precise to dismiss. A pen I left on the desk would be angled differently the next night. A dish I left to dry was resting upside down, as if inspected. None of it made sense. The strangest incident was with the curtains in my bedroom. I had drawn them firmly shut before bed, pressing the fabric into place to block out the streetlight. When I woke in the morning, the narrowest of gaps let light in, a slit just wide enough to suggest someone had wanted to peek through. That was when I started to notice the shadows. It wasn't dramatic. No figure standing tall against the wall, just the subtle movement of light across my ceiling where no light should shift. My blinds face the street, closed tight every evening, and yet more than once, as I read or tried to sleep, I caught the faint passage of a shadow gliding overhead. It wasn't the sway of tree branches or headlights. It was too slow, too deliberate. Each time, I'd freeze, staring up at the plaster. The moment I focused, the shadow would vanish, leaving me with the dull, oppressive quiet of the flat. The whispers followed not long after. They were faint, muffled, a thread of sound that seemed to bleed through the ceiling late at night. I'd be lying in bed, drifting towards sleep, when the noise would trickle in. At first I thought it might be the hum of pipes or distant traffic, but when I listened closer, the cadence betrayed itself. It wasn't mechanical, it was human. A voice, or perhaps more than one. The strangest part was how the sound stopped whenever I paid attention. The moment I held my breath, straining to catch a word, silence would descend, as if they knew I was listening. I began to wonder if they were talking about me. It's easy to dismiss paranoia in the light of day. Over breakfast, I'd shake my head, tell myself I was imagining things. But at night, in that vulnerable stretch between wakefulness and sleep, the feeling was undeniable. They knew when I was listening. They knew when I was awake. The weight of it began to shape my habits. I stopped reading in the living room and took to the bedroom, as though the thicker walls could shield me. I kept my shoes by the door, ready to slip on at the faintest provocation. My meals grew simpler, less time at the stove, more time watching the ceiling. It wasn't just the sounds either. I began to sense them in ways I couldn't explain. Dust sometimes drifted down in faint specks from the ceiling, catching the lamplight as though disturbed by unseen movement above. Once, as I sat at my desk, I felt the tiniest vibration ripple through the wood, as though someone had pressed their ear against the floorboards above me. I told myself not to think about it, but the thought returned every time. They were watching. Not casually, not coincidentally, with intent. The culmination came one quiet Thursday evening. Rain pattered against the street outside, filling the flat with a hush. I had settled in my chair, trying to lose myself in a paperback, when the noise came. It was not footsteps this time. It was a dragging sound. Long, slow, as though something heavy were being pulled across the floor. The vibration carried down through the ceiling into my walls. I sat rigid, staring up, tracing the path of the sound as it moved from one end of the ceiling toward the corner above my chair. Then silence. I stood, almost without meaning to, and crossed to the window. Pulling the blinds apart just enough to see, I peered up at the flat above. The windows were dark, curtains drawn. Not even the faint glow of a lamp leaked out. Yet the sound had been unmistakable. I closed the blinds quickly, the air in the flat too still, too dense. It felt wrong, like standing on a stage where unseen eyes followed every move. That night I tried to sleep, but my ears betrayed me. Every groan of the building became footsteps. Every shift of the mattress felt like weight pressing from above. And somewhere in that restless haze I swore I heard them whispering again. Low, urgent, stopping the instant I strained to catch the words. When I finally drifted into shallow sleep, I dreamed of nothing but ceilings. White plaster stretching endlessly overhead, shadows crawling across it like stains. The next morning, my lamp was on. I knew I had turned it off before bed. I was sure of it. And yet there it stood, casting its tired yellow glow across the room, as though someone had wanted to keep me awake. That was when I realized it wasn't just noise. They weren't content to exist above me. They were reaching down into my life, testing the boundaries. And each night I felt them growing bolder. The ceiling became more than plaster and wood to me. It was a veil, a thin skin separating my life from theirs. Every night I found myself staring at it longer, searching for signs, for the tremble of a shadow, for the faintest sound of movement. The silence was worst of all. Entire days went by when nothing stirred, no creaks, no whispers. That absence was heavier than noise. It made me feel as though they were holding their breath, waiting for me to let down my guard. I began leaving the lamp on in the living room too. At first it was just the bedroom, but I noticed how the shadows clung to corners of the flat, and I couldn't stand the thought of being watched through them. So every evening the flat glowed with yellow light, every bulb burning until morning. The electricity bill climbed, but I paid it without thought. Safety mattered more. And still, small things shifted. A glass out of place. The angle of a chair. Once I found my front door unlocked when I was sure I had turned the key. I tried to tell myself it was fatigue, my mind slipping details, but there were too many. Too precise. Each change carried a message, though I couldn't decipher it. One afternoon I sat at my desk with a mug of tea, staring at the wall, when a faint sprinkle of dust fell across the paper before me. Not much, just a few specks stirred loose from the ceiling above. But I hadn't moved. I hadn't touched anything. Someone had disturbed the boards. I pressed my palm flat to the surface of the desk. For a moment I could have sworn I felt a faint vibration, as though weight shifted slowly above me. My mind conjured the image of someone lying flat on their floor, ear pressed against the boards, listening. The thought lingered with me all evening, sour and persistent. If they were listening, what did they hear? My breathing, my muttered words as I read aloud? Did they know my routines as intimately as I knew the silence of theirs? That night I thought I saw one of them. I had stepped outside for a cigarette, a habit I'd picked up again in the thick of my unease. The air was damp, the streets slick with recent rain. I leaned against the brick wall of the building, drawing the smoke deep, trying to steady myself. That was when I looked up. The window above mine had a gap in the blinds. Just a fraction, but enough. Behind it, a shape lingered. A figure still as stone, head tilted just so, watching. My chest tightened. I blinked, and the gap was empty. The blinds hung flat. But the impression stayed with me, the distinct certainty that someone had stood there, staring down, patient and deliberate. After that, I started checking the windows obsessively, from the street, from the sidewalk, even from across the road, always closed, always dark. But I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on me, even when no figure appeared. Days blurred, sleep grew shallow, the rituals multiplied. Checking locks 3 times, rearranging objects in precise ways so I would know if they'd been touched. Still, every morning something was out of place. Then came the lamp. I woke in the middle of the night, heart hammering, not sure why. The room was lit, not by the lamp at my bedside, but the tall lamp in the corner. I hadn't turned it on. I knew I hadn't. I sat up slowly, throat dry, eyes locked on the glow spilling across the plaster ceiling. And there, just visible in the faint illumination, was a shadow. It wasn't mine. It stretched across the ceiling directly above me, long and thin, the shape of a body standing still. No movement, no sound, just a presence, fixed and waiting. I couldn't breathe. Every instinct told me to run, but I stayed frozen, eyes wide, heart drumming so loud I feared they would hear it. Minutes passed. The shadow did not move. And then, as if the silence itself had grown heavy, I blinked, and it was gone. But I knew what I had seen. They were no longer content with whispers and creaks. They wanted me to know they were there. They wanted me to see. I began to time my life around them. Not in any conscious way at first, but gradually every routine, every motion bent itself toward the rhythm of those faint creaks and whispers. My days became a waiting room for night. At work, I drifted through hours of paperwork and screens, barely remembering conversations with colleagues, barely tasting food at lunch. My thoughts sat fixed on the ceiling of my flat, as though the space above my head lived in my skull, even when I was blocks away. It had been weeks since I'd seen that shadow cast across the plaster. Weeks since I'd woken to the lamp burning when it shouldn't have been. But that didn't soothe me. The silence was worse. I couldn't shake the sense of a coiled pause, the weight of something holding itself back just long enough to let me unravel on my own. So I looked for confirmation. I thought maybe I could ground myself, root this unease in something normal. I started with the neighbours. There weren't many tenants left in the building. Once, it must have been a proud 3-story block, red brick with wide windows, but now only a handful of units were occupied. The rest were sealed off, blinds drawn, air stagnant. My landlord kept the place barely functional, the cracked tiles in the stairwell never fixed, the flickering light on the second floor buzzing on and off for months. On a Saturday morning, when I heard one of the other tenants descending the stairs, a woman in her 50s with shopping bags, I forced myself into the hall. "Excuse me," I said, catching her as she passed my door. She glanced up at me, weary-eyed, her shoulders hunched against the damp chill of the building. "Do you know the people upstairs?" I asked. "Upstairs?" "Yes, directly above me. Family, I think." She shifted the weight of her bags. "Don't know them," she said, quick, clipped. "Don't see them." And with that she moved past, the stairwell door closing behind her. That became the pattern. Every attempt I made to ask was met with shrugs, vague mutters. The man on the third floor laughed softly when I pressed. "I keep to myself," he said. "Best way in this place." No one ever claimed to know them. No one spoke their names. It was as though the family above me existed only in my flat, only in the space where my ceiling met their floor. I began to think maybe that was true. The paranoia set in harder. I left my phone recording overnight once, microphone pointed up at the plaster. In the morning I listened back, headphones tight against my ears, stomach churning as the file played. Mostly silence. Then faint at 2 a.m. A sound. It was nothing sharp, just a low thud. Then another, the pace of footsteps maybe. A long pause, and then, clearer than I wanted it to be, a sound like a voice. I couldn't make out words, but the cadence was there, rising and falling in the way speech does. A whisper, quick, urgent. Then silence. I listened again and again, heart in my throat, until I shut the laptop and shoved it away. Proof, I thought. Proof of what I already knew. But proof changed nothing. If anything, it made me worse. I stopped leaving the flat except for work. I avoided friends, ignored calls, ignored family. Nights stretched long and tense, lit by the hum of every lamp I owned. Sleep came in fractured bursts, and then, finally, one night, too much. It began with footsteps. Not the faint scuff I'd grown used to, but heavier. Pacing, deliberate, from one end of the ceiling to the other. Back and forth. I sat up in bed, listening, palms slick. Then the dragging sound started again. Furniture moved, the vibration rattling down through the light fixture, making the bulb sway. It stopped directly above me. I stood, heart hammering, and crossed the room to the door. My body moved before my mind caught up. I slipped shoes on, grabbed the old flathead screwdriver I kept in the drawer, and stepped into the stairwell. The air outside my flat was colder, sharper. The stairwell light flickered, buzzed, leaving shadows that seemed to shift when I blinked. I climbed slowly, screwdriver clutched tight, the boards creaking under my weight. At the door to the flat above mine, I stopped. It looked like any other door. Off-white paint peeling around the frame. A tarnished brass knob. No sound leaked out. No light glowed from underneath, but I knew they were in there. I knew they were standing still, waiting. I pressed my ear to the wood. Silence. And yet I could feel it, the same way I felt storms before they broke. A pressure, a presence, thick on the other side. My hand shook as I wedged the screwdriver into the gap near the lock. It wasn't a clean process. The metal slipped, scraped. I forced it harder, leaning my weight until the wood splintered. The latch gave. The door swung inward. The air inside was stale, colder than the stairwell. I stepped in. The hallway was narrow, almost a mirror of mine, the same warped boards, the same peeling paint. I could hear the faint buzz of a refrigerator deeper in. I moved slowly, my breath too loud in the silence. The living room opened up at the end of the hall, and there they were waiting. A family. 3 figures on the sofa, one in an armchair, all of them staring at me, faces white, eyes wide with shock. A man, a woman, 2 children. Perfectly ordinary in their clothes, their posture. Ordinary, except for the way their faces twisted at the sight of me, as though I were the intruder, the danger. For a moment we froze, the silence thick as stone. Then the woman's voice broke it, high and sharp. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't answer. My mouth opened, but no words came, because behind them in the glow of the lamplight I saw the wall. And the wall was covered with photographs of me. The wall stopped my breath. Every inch of it was papered with photographs. Not framed, not neat, but taped and pinned haphazardly in layers. Some were curling at the edges, some smeared, but all unmistakable. All of me. Me boiling pasta in the kitchen, me folding a shirt at the end of my bed, me in my chair with a book, lamplight yellow across my face. And worse, me asleep, mouth slightly open, sheets tangled. My body slack in vulnerability I had never consented to show. Dozens, hundreds, spanning seasons. My hair longer in some, shorter in others. Different clothes, different expressions. A timeline of my solitude laid bare in stolen moments. My stomach turned to stone. The woman on the sofa clutched her child's shoulder, pulling him closer. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice sharp but trembling. "What do you want from us?" The man rose halfway from his chair, hands raised as if to ward me off. His face was pale, lips parted. "Get out," he said. "Get out of our home." I could only stare at the wall, throat raw with the urge to scream, but unable to push the sound out. "You've been watching me," I managed at last. The words were hoarse, broken. "All this time." The woman shook her head violently. No, we thought it was you." The words hit me like cold water. "We thought you were watching us," she continued, voice cracking. "The noises, the shadows, the things moving in our flat. We thought—" Her voice dissolved into a ragged sob. The man found his footing now, stepping between me and his family. His eyes flicked to the screwdriver in my hand, then back to my face. "Leave?" he said again, firmer, though the tremor in his jaw betrayed his fear. "We've done nothing to you." But my eyes couldn't leave the photographs. "Then how do you explain this?" I hissed, stepping closer, pointing at the images that bled across the wall. The man turned, glanced, then whipped back around. His face twisted with something I hadn't expected. Fear, yes, but not of me. Not entirely. "They were here when we moved in," he whispered. The woman's sobbing quieted, her eyes red, fixed on me with a desperate intensity. "We didn't put them there. We found them. We thought you were." She trailed off, words strangled. My heart thundered. The floor felt unsteady beneath me, like the boards might give way and swallow us all. I took another step toward the wall, toward the grotesque collage of my own life. My face stared back in 100 frozen instants. Some were grainy, blurred with motion, others sharp, too sharp, as though taken from only feet away. And then I saw it. In some of the photos, faint but there, the top edge of the frame, the angle of perspective, looking down, through the ceiling. My chest constricted. I stumbled back, nearly colliding with the man. He flinched but didn't stop me, his eyes darting toward the ceiling above us as though he too felt the pull. "We thought you were the one doing it," he repeated, voice shaking. "We thought you were watching us." The children whimpered on the sofa, small voices trembling in the stillness. For a long moment none of us moved. The flat was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the faint whistle of wind through the old window frames, and then a sound. From above, a soft creak, the shift of weight on old boards. All of us froze, heads tilting upward in unison. The man's lips parted, but no words came. The woman clutched her children tighter, rocking them unconsciously. Another creak. Then a dragging sound. Long, deliberate, as though furniture were being shifted across the floor, directly above our heads. The photographs trembled on the wall, a few slipping loose, fluttering to the ground. Images of me scattering at my feet. The man's face drained of colour. He looked at me with wild eyes, all accusation gone, replaced with the naked terror of someone who had just confirmed his worst suspicion. "It's not us," he whispered. The dragging stopped. The silence that followed was deeper than any I had known in my flat, heavier, pressing against my eardrums like weight. And then, through that silence, something else. A whisper. Low, urgent, impossible to make out. But not from here. Not from this room. From above. The woman shook her head, muttering under her breath, eyes squeezed shut. The children buried their faces against her. My gaze locked on the ceiling, on the sagging plaster, the faint yellow stain where water had once leaked. And in that moment I understood. It had never been about the flat above mine. It was higher still, someone else, watching us all. The photographs on the wall rustled again, as though stirred by breath. My face stared back from a dozen angles, every expression stripped and catalogued. And in the silence we all listened. Myself, the family, all of us caught beneath that weight in the ceiling, as something shifted above, deliberate and slow. They were watching. From above. You've just listened to Their Watching from Above, a tale of solitude, of neighbours unseen, and the weight of silence pressing down from the ceiling. In the end, what seemed like a simple question, who lives upstairs, opened into something deeper, something more unsettling, the possibility that we are all being watched, from higher still. As you drift now into sleep, Let the story settle into the corners of your mind like the quiet hum of an old building at night. The footsteps above you are probably nothing more than pipes or settling boards. Probably. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. If you'd like more sleep stories, dark tales that calm the body while stirring the imagination, be sure to subscribe and return for the next one. For now, let your eyes grow heavy, let the world fade to quiet, and may your dreams be peaceful, even if the ceiling creaks. Good night.